Welcome to School of PE podcast. I'm your host, Chris Miller, and I'm so glad that you could join me this week. We are going to discuss topics about FE, PE, and SC, and we're also going to answer questions that will help students prepare for their exams. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the SOPE podcast. We got a special guest here today with us. We have Aleksandr Treyger. He's a PE and a PMP. So excited to have you today, Aleksandr. Thanks for joining us. And if you want to start off by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely my pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure to be with you today. Well, as you mentioned, I'm a licensed engineer. I've been an engineer for many years. And I'm also a PMP, right? I've been certified for 5 to 7 years now. And I teach multiple classes, right? I teach classes in engineering. And now with your help, I'm also going to teach classes on project management, right? So that's what I do. I do a lot of teaching. I do a lot of writing, right? So, my pleasure to be with you.
Well, thanks. And thanks for giving us a little bit of a backdrop on you. We're happy to have you on board at School of PE. I know you help out in a lot of different areas. So it's just kind of cool today to kind of get to know you a little bit better than I do just from the emails that have been going back and forth. So today, I guess we are talking about climate change and the future of hydropower. Sounds like some exciting topics. Let's kind of get started here. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, hey, if we can start off by maybe you taking a few moments to, describe from your point of view or your perspective, what is the current state of climate change debate?
Well, obviously the climate changes, right? Some people saying it's not the case, but, it's happening. And you could observe it pretty much, every day. This summer was the hottest summer on record, right? So, if people disagree with the fact, if people disagree with the obvious scientific fact, just check the numbers, right? Climate changes, and, you can't hide from the scientific fact.
That is true. I know in Ohio, we just are now starting to get out of that summer temperature weather. I'm happy to say it's finally cooling off around here. Where are you based out of, Aleksandr?
I'm actually in New Jersey, pretty close to NYC, to New York. I'm on Jersey Shore. I'm on the Jersey Shore.
Very cool. I was actually just in Jersey last week. I had a presentation at NJIT, beautiful university out there.
Mm-hmm. I know them.
Yeah, it's definitely, the weather was good actually out there, so it was kind of nice. I went to Jersey and then I ended up flying out of LaGuardia, so it wasn't too bad. So what do you think are the main threats to climate change?
Well, climate change is definitely a major impact to the humanity. First of all, of course, we're talking about flooding of the populated areas, such as Jersey Shore or even NYC itself. Of course, it's terrible. We don't want it to happen. Also, we're talking about droughts, right? We're losing agricultural capabilities, right? We're losing land, right? Cultivated land because of the droughts. And it's also a loss of hydropower, right? Obviously, if we have less of water, if we have less of rainfalls, right? That's a substantial loss of hydropower, which is not easy, right?
Agree. Well, thank you for that. So, climate change affects a lot of different things, right? It affects different industries, agricultural being one of them. It affects us as people, but it also affects, animals, the farms, and even the ocean. So, what can you describe some of those ways that those different ecosystems are affected?
Well, it's obvious many species go extinct these days, right? Some of the species that were abundant a couple of years ago, or 100 years ago, they're now extinct. And the other species that basically were non-existent, they are growing in population. So obviously the environment changes in this sense, right? We're losing water supply to an extent, right? Droughts are a major problem, right? So obviously the environment changes, and I see it as a threat, and many people see it as a threat, and something needs to be done about it, right? Something needs to be done about it.
No, I agree. Well said. So, change is, I guess, difficult for, and any kind of change is difficult for everybody a little bit. So looking at the overall picture, what are some of the factors that are within our control that can affect climate change?
I believe, and a lot of scientists are of the same opinion. A lot could be done by the humanity to improve the situation. Number one, of course, is to reduce pollution as much as we can, reduce pollutions, emissions of all kinds. Also, I believe it's a great idea, it's a necessary idea to look for alternative sources of power, right? That's obviously what's going to happen. And a big deal is to stop deforestation, right? Forests got to be there, right? We don't want to destroy them all, right? That's a big deal.
I agree. So how important do you think it is for either or both businesses and large organizations to implement renewable energy options?
Well, I absolutely believe it's a very good idea and it's necessary. And that's probably the only way to go. We can't continue to burn, the traditional fuels, right? We can't continue to do it. One way or the other, we're going to destroy the planet by doing it. So the alternative sources of energy are a necessity.
Makes sense. So, climate change or global warming, some people, like you said, they either believe it or they don't. You have people that are on, both sides of the fence, or sometimes you even have some of the people that are sitting on the fence. They don't really have not a thought, but a viewpoint one way or the other. So, if someone were to say to you that the whole idea of climate change is a conspiracy theory, what would you say to that person?
Well, check the temperatures. Check the temperatures and check the weather forecast, right? It's never been that hot this time of the year. That's it, right?
Numbers don't lie. That's for sure.
That is it, yep.
Yeah, no, you're right. Like I mentioned earlier, that Ohio just started cooling off, and usually by this time we would have been well into the 60s for the most part. But we had a couple of 80-degree days not too long ago, and then even yesterday, I think it was probably in the mid 70s, so a little bit warm for Ohio at least. So you're right, numbers don't lie. So now that we've kind of had a short discussion on climate change, you mentioned hydropower earlier, so maybe we can talk about hydropower a little more in detail. So let's kind of start off with maybe an overview or a brief explanation of how does hydropower work?
Well, hydropower has been known for many years, right? For centuries. It was used basically in ancient Rome and before the ancient Rome. Essentially, what happens, water spins the wheel, and the wheel helps the generator produce the electricity. And that's about it. That's how it works. Water spins the wheel, and that's the basic idea of it.
Sounds pretty simple. Makes sense. A really great way to do some alternative energy. So I know you had mentioned that it's been around since the ancient Roman times, but do you know how it originated?
Well, I believe ancient people observed water falling, right? They figure out that it might spin a wheel, and that was the beginning of it. It was a historical observation by early humans, I would assume.
That makes sense. And so you were saying that basically water turns the wheel, and then that is what powers the generators. So generators, they come in all different sizes and capacities. What is the capacity to which these generators can operate? And how much how much power can they create?
Well, you know what? I teach a class about the Hoover Dam. I've been teaching that class for a long time, and basically, one hydro plant can power a whole region, right? Let's say that's what happens with the Hoover Dam, right? One set of generators powers the whole region. So hydropower has huge capacity. It can allow huge capacity, right? And if you sign up to my class, I'm going to tell you more.
Yeah, I'm intrigued. Can you go a little bit more in detail of some of the other topics that you covered during your Hoover Dam class?
Well, we're talking about the history of the construction of the Hoover Dam, what it took to build it, right? We're talking about the economics. And also, to a degree, we're talking about the climate change, how it affects the production of electricity.
Sounds interesting. I might just have to sign up for that course. Um, a lot of times, people talk about implementing change. Maybe you're changing from an old infrastructure to a new infrastructure, or maybe, even software development or IT systems. But one of the main questions or concerns is always about cost. How much is it going to cost, and what are the benefits of it? So, sometimes they'll do a cost benefit analysis, but you know, based on your experience and knowledge, what is the average cost of implementing these types of systems?
I'm not sure, but I can come up with exact numbers. But I tell you what, hydropower, it's clean, and hydropower is also cheap. It's clean and cheap, and that's basically the idea of the Hoover Dam, right? It was the original idea of the Hoover Dam, to produce cheap electricity, and that electricity, the cost of that electricity, basically ended up paying for the whole project altogether. So it's cheap electricity, it's very cheap electricity, and it's also clean energy. So that's the advantages of it.
That's interesting. So it kind of answers part of my next question. There is, I was going to ask you what are the if you could describe some of the main advantages and disadvantages of hydropower. So one of the advantages, we know it's clean and it's fairly cheap. So any other advantages, and what would be some of the disadvantages of the hydropower?
Well, it's relatively inexpensive to construct a hydropower plant. It's relatively inexpensive. And also, once you build it, basically it works for you. You don't need to worry about the fuel. You don't need to worry about, the delivery of gas, of oil, of anything. It's there for you, right? So that's a huge advantage of it. Once implemented, it produces that electricity for you for a long time to come.
Sounds simple enough. So what maintenance is involved in hydropower?
Well, if you take, for example, the Hoover Dam, it requires a minimum maintenance, almost none. Basically, you just maintain the generators themselves, right? Schedule maintenance, and that's about it. If you're talking about the dam itself, right, it's going to be there for 1,000 years to come, right, and requires essentially no maintenance whatsoever. So only mechanical components and certain electrical components require maintenance. Everything else is going to be there for a long, long time, for centuries.
All right, so it'll be a long-standing structure for sure. Mm-hmm. So I guess another question that I have is, what is required to do these types of installations?
Well, first of all, planning, a lot of planning. You have to find a perfect location, right? And you also have to come up with a reliable design. That was, let's say, a major challenge of planning the Hoover Dam, right? Before they erected it, they considered multiple locations. They considered dozens of locations before they found a perfect one that, fit all the requirements.
So what makes the location that they found that perfect location?
Well, the amount of labor it will take to build the dam. And also, they were thinking about the environmental effect, at the time, right? How the dam would affect the local environment.
That makes sense. So, we spoke about climate change, and, hydropower, I guess, can kind of go hand in hand with combating climate change. So, maybe you can expand on this and talk to the audience about in what other ways does hydropower, combat climate change?
Well, I would say most of all, it's clean power. That's the most important part of it, right? It's carbon free, right? There's no emissions, and as I mentioned before, once it's built, basically you forget about it. There's no further environmental impact, right? It just produces your power with minimal maintenance, and that's about it. So the way I see it is, once you build it, basically you forget about it, and just just consume the benefits of it.
That sounds really good. So, one of the nice things about, I mean, there's many great things about engineering, but one of the things that fascinates me is how things have evolved over through time. A lot of it due to technology improvements, technology changes. So over the years that through your experience, can you maybe discuss or describe some of the technology advancements that you've seen in the industry that you're in?
Well, what I observe a lot is the investments in solar power, the investments in wind power. Um, Also, people learn how to harness the power of tides and the ocean waves, right? So what I've seen a lot of developments in green power, right? Um, and I believe is the future of the energy, right? It's the future of the energy because one way or the other, as I said before, we have to be carbon free because otherwise we're gonna destroy our planet, right? So I see a lot of developments in green power, and I'm personally very happy with it.
Yeah, as am I. Thank you for sharing that. Well, we talked about a lot of the great things that hydropower affords the environment. What is the worst thing that could happen at a hydropower facility?
Well, that class that I'm gonna teach in a couple of weeks, right, about the environment changes and the impact of those changes to the hydropower production, right? It's all about basically your question, right?
Hmm.
Worst case scenario, if you lose your water source, or if the amount of water available for the power production is greatly reduced, right? And I would say that's the major fear right now, and that's pretty much what we observe with that Hoover Dam, right? The level of water in the lake, the level of water in the lake that sources the power plant is lower than ever before. It's lower than ever before. And there's the fear if it continues like that, right? The amount of hydropower, might be reduced, in the US and globally.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So, I think it was either last year, maybe early this year, Texas suffered some widespread power outages due to maybe the capacity on the grids. So why would somebody want to be able to dispatch power to the grid immediately in an event of a outage?
Well, if you lose power, it's not really a joke. It's a really big deal, right? Because people need power for everything these days, right? You need the power to cool down your house. You need the power to heat up your house. Or let's say, if you run on medical devices, you need to sustain them too, right? You can't afford to lose power these days, even for a moment, right? So the loss of hydropower, the loss of power sources is really a big deal, and it's life threatening oftentimes.
I agree. I remember, this kind of talked about how much time has changed. I remember when, growing up as a kid, every now and then you'd lose power, maybe during a bad lightning storm or rainstorm. And it wasn't such a big deal then, right? I mean, you'd light a candle, you'd play some board games. But
Hmm.
now, if you lose power, kids just freak out. No more iPhone, no more iPad. So it's just kind of interesting to see how I guess reliant we've become on electricity, not just for your necessities such as air conditioning or heating, but just to power your regular devices that you use to either communicate or entertain. So definitely been an interesting journey for sure. Here's a question. It might sound like a silly question, but I think I'll ask it anyways. So couldn't we just rig every single waterfall to produce hydropower?
Uh, Probably not, and probably that's not really needed. It sounds enticing, but probably it's not needed, and it's not possible. And that's why we need that wind power. That's why we need that tidal power, right? Because we can't really build a hydro plant everywhere.
Makes sense. So is hydropower sustainable?
Well, if the climate stop changing, yes, right. But if we absorb more and more losses um, of water sources, well, it becomes a problem.
I agree. So, what is the growth potential of this particular industry?
Well, I keep mentioning my class that's coming in a couple of weeks about hydropower. Let me mention it again. I'm going to cover this topic a lot there, right? But essentially, potential is huge, especially in developing countries such as Brazil and Africa, right? And we're going to talk about it during the class. So,
All right.
please sign up.
Excited. Absolutely excited to hear about that. So, I don't know if you can give an exact number, or maybe you can provide a round number, but on your estimation, how many hydropower plants are producing electricity today?
It's hundreds. It's hundreds. And during the class, I'm going to show you the map, right, with the power plants marked pretty much on all continents.
All right. It seems like that class that you're getting ready to teach will share a lot of useful and some interesting information for sure. So looking forward to that. So, Alexander, we've had a chance today to talk about climate change, hydropower, some more, I guess, deeper conversations we had. But, I'd like to, since this is our first time chatting, I'd like to kind of ask some more fun questions to kind of get to know you a little bit better, and also for the audience to get to know you a little bit better as well. So let me ask you, so at what point did you decide that engineering was the particular path that you wanted to pursue?
Well, I think my decision was very simple because my father is engineer, my grandfather is an engineer, so the decision was pretty easy and straightforward. And also, I love science fiction. I love science fiction, and it's all about engineering, right? When you read about science fiction, right? You probably want to try to do something like that.
Fair enough. So you could basically say it was in your blood. Carrying on
Probably, yeah.
another generation of engineers. So, all right. So we know what got you started in your journey to engineering. So let's say, Alexander, that you got invited to the local high school for career day. And a senior walks up to you and says, Mr. Treyger, I got a question for you. I'm thinking about going into engineering. Do you have any advice that you could give this high school senior?
Of course, go do it, right? Of course, go do it. And learn to love science. Learn to love science. Read about science. Read books about science. Watch movies about science. Learn to love it.
Fair enough. That's some valid and good advice for any one that's looking to pursue engineering as a career. Engineering is fascinating, right? I mean, you can learn about roads, wastewater plants, bridges. You can be a traffic engineer. So a mechanical engineer. So the potential is almost limitless in engineering and what you can pursue or maybe even achieve. So over the years, as I mentioned, a lot of things have changed, right? Technology improved, new technologies discovered. What would you say is the biggest surprise that you've come across in engineering?
Well, when I was a young kid, I expected engineering to be all fun, right? I designed fun things, I designed trucks, I designed airplanes, I designed everything. And then I discovered that it's not only fun, right? Let's say you have to work on the paperwork, you have to work a lot on the economics, you need to learn how to count your money and your project's money. So that kind of surprised me, right? You have to be an adult, right, when you go into engineering.
It makes sense. It's not all fun and games, right? I mean, you might be responsible for building a bridge, but you're also responsible for a lot of the paperwork that comes along with it. So that's true. So, well, let's see if you can maybe think back long ago or even recently. What would you say are some of your favorite experiences that you've had as an engineer?
Well, I like the moment when I turn over the project, when I turn over the experience, right? The sense of satisfaction. You build something new, the customer takes over it, right? It starts to work, it starts to generate profit. And I just love that moment, right? I just love the moment, and I keep thinking about all those projects where I was involved, right? I love to build, let's put it this way.
So it sounds like you've worked on many projects over the years. Can you maybe talk briefly about what your favorite project may have been?
I guess I love to work in pharmaceutical industry, right? Because when you work in pharmaceutical industry, you are personally responsible for people's health, right? And there's a sense of satisfaction that you really tried someone to survive, you really try someone to recover, right, to regain health, right? So I would say that's very rewarding in this sense, right? When you work in the medical field or in the medical device field, you really feel needed and involved.
That's very rewarding for sure. So thank you for sharing that today with us, Aleksandr. So it has been a pleasure speaking with you today, going over the topic of climate change, hydropower. I'd love to have you back on another time, Aleksandr. I'd love for you to come back and we can get into something else together. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about your Hoover Dam class and some of the topics that are in there. But again, thank you for coming out and spending some time with me. To the rest of you, till the next episode, you guys all have a great day and enjoy the rest of the week.